How well does a Coyote respond to performance modifications? You know, cylinder heads, camshafts, intakes. But more importantly, can it make more power than an LS? In this video, we got two things going on. First of all, I've got a series of modifications on a Gen 1 Coyote. This dates all the way back to 2010, so I'm OG Coyote. Now we're gonna run a series of modifications, cold air intakes, headers, nitrous, cylinder heads, camshafts, a blower, you name it. I tested it all back then on this Gen 1 Coyote motor. And we're gonna go through that in a series of videos. So that's super cool. That's what we're starting with in this video. But I also want to use this opportunity to tell you guys, I'm gonna run a Big Bang Coyote test. For those of you guys that are not familiar, the Big Bang series tests the strength of the bottom end. How strong is that Coyote motor if we add a little extra ring gap? Here's what we do. We went to the wrecking yard and picked up, and I've done this with a ton of motors, but the most popular obviously is the LS. We've gone to the wrecking yard, we picked up a motor. We add ring gap to the factory ring, we don't replace the ring. We then install good heads, a camshaft, intake manifold, and 2 turbos. We turn the boost up safely using ice water and good gas, and find out how much power the stock bottom end will take. So far, the record is held by an LS 6-liter. We made 1,543 horsepower on a Gen 4 6-liter, and that motor's still alive. The question now is, and here's what I want to find out from Coyote owners, do you think a Gen 2 Coyote can beat that record? I want to see how strong that the Gen 2 Coyote really is. We're going to add extra ring gap, ARP head studs, gaskets, we'll port the factory heads. I got a good set of cams, we got a good intake manifold on it, we can run a Boss or anything else. There are a ton of good selections for that. I got 2 turbos that will supply at least 2,000 horsepower, and we're going to turn it all the way up till we find out what breaks. Now that we've announced the Big Bang test on that Gen 2 Coyote, we need to get back to our Gen 1 testing. This stuff was run back in 2010 and 2011. I had a crate motor, a 5-liter Coyote crate motor from the guys at Ford Racing. They sent it out so I could do a bunch of testing with it. So this was run way back when, and unfortunately, I don't have any video of the engines actually running on the dyno, because I did these for magazine stories back in the day, so there's only photos. I'll try to make noises in the background so you know what a Coyote sounds like. I'm sure all you guys know anyways. So what we did was we took the motor and ran it up on the dyno with their controls pack, and we did all the tuning while on the dyno. We ran it stock, then we ran it with things like a JLT cold air intake, we ran long tube headers on it, we ran nitrous on it, then we got into a little more serious stuff. We started doing camshafts, ported heads, a variety of different intakes, including the Boss stuff. We also ran a Kenny Bell supercharger. I tried a turbo on it. We ran a ton of stuff. So what I want to do is a series on this Gen 1 Coyote. We're going to start off with some of the simple stuff, find out how well it did, and then the next video, we'll continue that. But keep that in mind. We're also going to do the Gen 2 Coyote Big Bang deal, so I'm getting all that ready. Enjoy the video. To get things started, we installed the Coyote up on the dyno. Now it was configured with the factory exhaust manifold supplied with the crate motor. We hooked that up to basically an open 2.5-inch exhaust with no mufflers on it. It was a free-flowing exhaust, no cats, no nothing, but we had yet to put on the headers. We also configured the Coyote with a Mazir electric water pump, meaning it had no accessories on the front. Now we did have the factory air box feeding the factory throttle body. We also had Ken from Kenny Bell there to help us tune the combination. You see, the hard part about testing a Coyote is going through all the permutations of the variable cam and ignition timing. Now the easy way is just to let it run closed loop and call it good. The problem is that doesn't provide optimum results. Anytime you make a change with cylinder heads or camshafts or air intakes or whatever it is, you got to go through the cam timing sweeps. If you don't find the optimum combination. So we put this motor up on the dyno, got it ready. The first thing we did was run it in stock trim with it tuned. Then we installed the long tube headers, again, tuned it again. Then we added a little bit of nitrous. In subsequent videos, we're going to follow that up with air intake systems, some camshafts, and ported cylinder heads, and then maybe even get into some forced induction because we also ran a Kenny Bell on this thing. So let's find out how the stock Coyote did and how it responded to those simple modifications. Okay, this is the power output of our 2011 Gen 1 Coyote motor, and run on the engine dyno with the factory ECU and the Ford Racing Ford Performance Controls pack. We did a little tuning on it, make sure everything was right, and after the tuning, this thing produced 448 horsepower. and 405 foot-pounds of torque. You might be asking yourself, hey, this is a Gen 1 motor, why is it making so much power? Why is it so much different than the factory rating? Well, it has to do with the way that we test it. Obviously, the factory tests their engine on the engine dyno. They don't test it on the chassis dyno. They test on the engine dyno, but they test it the way that it is in the car. So it has everything hooked up to it. It has all the accessories. It has all of the full exhaust, cats, everything. Has the full air intake. It's also run at temperature, and it's run with the factory programming, which, as we know, because there's tuners available for these things, that they definitely leave power on the table. So this is basically an optimized combination. It still has the factory exhaust manifolds on it, but has an open exhaust, no cats or anything. It has no accessories on it, and it does have the factory air intake on it. So it has that one thing basically, but not the rest. And we've optimized the tune, and it's also run at a slightly lower temperature. I think that this was 145 or 150 degrees when we ran this. So it's got a lot of things going for it that make it produce obviously more power than the factory rating. So it's just a function of the way that we test it. But it doesn't matter, we're just using this as the baseline to start out with. Then we'll do mods on top of this. So we'll show you what the gains are. So the first thing we did was to install a set of long tube headers. And if you take a look, there's some serious power gains there from the headers, especially down low. And this is kind of typical of long tube headers. They offer a lot of scavenging, and that improves the power output through most of the curve. A lot of guys think that it's just flow, but it's not. A short runner like stock exhaust style manifold might actually flow more than a long tube does. But because it's not flow, except at the very top, at the very power peak where you might see flow, this is actually scavenging from the runner length, just like on the intake manifold. The exhaust does the same thing, it just does it in reverse, helps draw out residual exhaust gases and actually help draw in the induction charge, which helps improve power. And we saw this big change down low, this was a good gain. So we got things started with the long tube headers. So now we're going to continue, and the next step we're going to run is we're going to add nitrous. After dialing the Coyote in and then installing the long tube headers, that was our new baseline. So equipped with the headers, power output was 462 horsepower, and the peak torque was up to 411 foot-pounds of torque. Now what we wanted to do is we had access to a nitrous system. So this was a Zex wet fogger. So it combined the nitrous and fuel into one nozzle, and we positioned that in front of the throttle body and injected it. So now let's take a look and see what happens after we introduce the nitrous to the Coyote. Coyotes love everything, cams, head, cylinder head, or boost, obviously nitrous as well. So here's what happened when we introduced the nitrous to the Coyote. Nice power output jump to 554 horsepower, and the peak torque was up to 540 foot-pounds of torque. So as we have come to expect from nitrous, it worked out very well. And you can see we activated this thing around 4,000 RPM, and then you get a little bit of a surge there on the dyno. And it grabs a hold of it, and you can see a nice consistent gain. So we had 25. Yeah, so we had 100 horsepower jetting in this thing. We pulled about 3 degrees of timing on this. On this we were just running pump gas, which was 91 octane in California, not the best stuff. We did bring the ring gap down, or not the ring gap, we brought the plug gap down a little bit. We put it down around 25 or 26 just to make sure that we wouldn't have any misfires. I didn't think we would. It would be a good idea when you start getting in these power adders like this to install a colder plug. On this particular test, we just went with the factory plug, which is a fairly hot one from the factory. That's kind of typical. So I would suggest going to a colder plug if you're going to be running nitrous, a lot of nitrous, or nitrous a lot of times, which we all do. I mean, I've gone through bottles and bottles of it. Stuff works really good. So this Coyote was now making good power. I mean, 550 horsepower, that's a good amount. And as we'll see later on when we start getting more serious about this Gen 1 motor, that 550 horsepower is going to come and go with just the NA mods that we did. And I'm sure that the Gen 2 guys are already seeing that stuff. They're making a ton of power. That's a good combination. So we've got stuff in store for this. We've got an air intake, got cams, got ported cylinder heads. I think before we get to that stuff, we're going to run boost from a Kenny Bell, which did really well. We'll get to that stuff later. That's coming up in another video. let's get to our conclusion. Okay guys, what did you think? I mean, I was really impressed when we started making modifications to this Gen 1 Coyote. Of all the motors I've tested, and I've been doing this for 25 years, that Gen 1 Coyote had the highest BMEP number I've ever seen on any kind of production motor. I mean, it had numbers that are only generated by like dedicated 15-to-1 dry sump race motors. So it was super impressive, and the Coyote did really well. I mean, you can credit the variable cam timing. It has the right kind of intake runner length, and we had put cams in it, and the heads work really well. So it has a lot of stuff going for it, and that was just the Gen 1 stuff. The Gen 2 stuff is even better. But I'm also super excited about doing this big bang test because I think the Coyote has the possibility to topple the King. I mean, there are two motors that I figured, hey, these guys might be able to take out that LS motor and make more than that 1,543 horsepower. One was a big block Chevy. Now, I like the big block Chevy. They have a lot going for them. They've got a bunch of displacement. It makes it easier to get the power number. I just don't know if they have the strength to get up to that big number. I was putting all my eggs in one basket when I decided to do this Coyote because I think the Coyote has the strength to get to that number because it's going to make peak power at a much higher RPM. It's going to have less torque, which is usually what breaks them. So it's got a lot of stuff going for it, and I'm really excited to run that test. Guys, thanks for watching. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Keep watching this series, and I'll keep doing the testing.